Off the coast of South Africa, great white sharks have been observed hunting in a way that should not be physically possible for something their size. They approach from directly below, from depth, accelerating vertically through the water column at a speed that carries them completely clear of the surface, the entire animal airborne for a moment before gravity brings it back down. The attack is over before the prey has had time to register that it began. This hunting strategy has worked for millions of years, not because evolution stopped refining it, because evolution kept trying and found very little worth changing. The great white shark has been essentially this for more than 11 million years. The same basic design, the same fundamental approach, outlasting predators that came after it, surviving conditions that erased entire ecosystems, continuing to occupy the top of the ocean food chain across a time span that makes human civilization look like an afterthought. And yet there may be fewer than a few thousand of them left on Earth. And in 2017, something happened that changed how scientists think about this animal entirely. Two orcas arrived in South African waters, just two, and the great whites, the apex predators that the rest of the ocean had organized itself around, left. Hunting grounds abandoned. Behaviors that had persisted for years simply stopped. The sharks did not come back, which raises a question that is harder to answer than it looks. If the great white can be displaced by two animals, what does its dominance in the ocean actually rest on? What makes something the most feared predator in the sea, and what does it mean for that fear when you find out it has limits? Today, we're uncovering why one of the ocean's most feared animals remains one of its most successful. Somewhere beneath the movement of modern waves lies a memory so old that almost nothing familiar remains around it. Coastlines have wandered across the globe, mountain ranges have risen and worn away, entire oceans have opened and vanished. Yet within layers of stone laid down across unimaginable spans of time, a particular shape keeps appearing. Not the exact animal known today, but the outline of an ancient strategy, already present long before forests spread across the continents, and long before reptiles, birds, or mammals emerged to inherit the land. The ocean itself is approximately 3.8 billion years old, a realm so ancient that much of Earth's history unfolded entirely beneath its surface. Sharks entered that story roughly 450 million years ago. They were already moving through prehistoric seas before the first tree rooted itself in soil. They existed before dinosaurs appeared, before flowering plants transformed landscapes, before the earliest vertebrates fully committed themselves to life on land. While countless lineages rose, diversified, and disappeared, the shark lineage endured, adapting quietly through one age after another. The great white belongs to a much more recent branch of that immense family tree, though recent is a relative term measured against geological time. Fossil evidence traces the lineage of Carcharodon carchareus back at least 11 million years to the late Miocene, an era when grasslands were spreading across continents and many familiar animals had yet to evolve into their modern forms. The world those early ancestors inhabited would feel strange and distant, yet the foundations of the predator were already becoming recognizable. The body plan, the hunting architecture, the essential design were beginning to settle into a form that would prove remarkably durable. For many years, a different story captured public imagination. Because both animals possessed enormous serrated teeth and occupied the role of apex predator, it seemed natural to assume that the great white descended directly from the colossal megalodon. The fossil record tells a more intricate story. Megalodon belonged to its own evolutionary lineage, one that eventually disappeared around 3.6 million years ago. The great white followed another path entirely, emerging from an extinct group of broad-toothed mako sharks. Among the most important pieces of evidence is Carcharodon hobili, a transitional species identified through fossils discovered in Peru and later confirmed through detailed analysis. Its teeth preserve a gradual shift between older mako-like forms and the unmistakable serrated design associated with modern great whites. As one lineage vanished, the other continued. The transition was not a succession from giant to smaller descendant. It was more like two branches extending from deeper roots, one ending, the other carrying forward into the present ocean. Recent discoveries have only expanded the sense of antiquity surrounding these animals. Fossils described in northern Australia during 2025 revealed that ancestors of modern shark lineages were already functioning as apex predators roughly 115 million years ago. They shared ancient seas with giant marine reptiles during the age of dinosaurs, occupying ecological roles at the top of food webs, while continents still drifted toward their modern arrangement. The basic operating principles that define shark success were already established in a world almost impossible to recognize. Seen from this perspective, the great white occupies an unusual place in natural history. It did not suddenly conquer the ocean through some recent evolutionary breakthrough. It did not rise dramatically from obscurity to dominance. Instead, it belongs to a lineage that has persisted near the summit of marine ecosystems for spans of time that stretch beyond ordinary comprehension, surviving not because the ocean stopped changing, but because its fundamental design remained capable of changing with it. Long before a great white moves, before a tail sweeps or a jaw opens, its body is already solving problems that most marine animals never face. It is carrying the result of millions of years spent refining motion through water, not through force alone, but through efficiency. Every surface, every curve, every internal structure contributes to an animal built less like a conventional fish and more like a living expression of hydrodynamics. One of the first surprises lies hidden beneath the skin. The great white possesses no bones at all. There is no rigid skeleton supporting its body, no dense framework like the one found inside mammals, reptiles, or most fishes. Instead, its entire internal architecture is constructed from cartilage, the same flexible material found in the human nose and ears. Cartilage is lighter than bone, requiring less energy to move through water, yet it remains strong enough to support an animal of immense size. The result is a body capable of subtle bends and rapid acceleration, able to absorb and redirect force without the stiffness that heavier skeletal systems impose. In the largest females, that framework supports a predator reaching more than 6 meters in length and weighing well over 2,000 kilograms. Yet size alone does not explain its movement. Large animals often sacrifice agility in exchange for power. The great white achieves both through a design that distributes strength across the entire body, rather than concentrating it in a few massive structures. When it turns, the motion flows from head to tail in a smooth traveling wave, energy passing through cartilage and muscle with remarkable efficiency. The skin contributes as much to this performance as the skeleton beneath it. At a casual glance, the surface appears smooth, but under magnification, it reveals a landscape of tiny overlapping structures called dermal denticles. Each resembles a microscopic tooth, complete with ridges and sharp contours. Rather than creating resistance, these denticles guide water into narrow channels that reduce turbulence along the body. Water remains attached to the surface longer, allowing the shark to move with less drag. Engineers studying high-performance vehicles and underwater technology have spent decades examining these structures, attempting to imitate solutions evolution arrived at long ago. Color serves a similarly practical purpose. From above, the shark appears dark gray with hints of blue blending into the depths below. From beneath, its underside fades into pale white, merging with the brightness filtering down from the surface. The effect is known as countershading, though in practice it feels less like camouflage and more like disappearance. A seal looking downward sees darkness, a fish looking upward sees light. The shark occupies the narrow boundary between both worlds, concealed from either direction by the same body. Behind that body stretches a tail unlike those of most fishes. Its crescent shape appears almost symmetrical, with upper and lower lobes approaching equal size. This balance allows force to be directed with exceptional precision. Instead of producing large amounts of unwanted lift, the tail converts muscular energy into forward thrust, helping maintain both speed and control. The motion is powerful yet economical, suited equally to long journeys and sudden bursts of acceleration. Threaded through the muscles is another adaptation, one less visible but equally remarkable. A specialized network of blood vessels known as the rete mirabilis, the wonderful net, allows the shark to retain heat generated by its own activity. While surrounding waters may remain cold, parts of the body can stay between 5 and 14 degrees Celsius warmer than the ocean around them. The result is an animal carrying a small reservoir of warmth through a world that constantly attempts to take it away, a quiet advantage woven deeply into a body shaped by deep time. Temperature rules most of the ocean. Invisible boundaries drift through the water, separating regions where life moves quickly from regions where life slows. In many marine animals, the sea itself acts as a master clock, setting the pace of every muscle contraction and every burst of motion. As the water cools, bodies cool with it, reactions lengthen, movement becomes more deliberate. Energy is conserved because it must be. Most sharks live according to those rules. They are ectothermic animals, their internal temperature rising and falling with the surrounding sea. A shark entering colder water does not carry warmth with it. The ocean gradually draws heat away, and the body adjusts accordingly. Muscles become less efficient, acceleration declines, and prolonged exertion becomes more costly. Across much of the shark family, this arrangement has worked successfully for hundreds of millions of years. The great white follows a different path. Hidden within its body is an adaptation so unusual that it separates the species from the vast majority of its relatives. The great white is a partial endotherm, one of only a handful of sharks capable of maintaining temperatures significantly above the surrounding water. It does not generate warmth in the same way mammals do, nor does it become entirely independent of environmental conditions. Instead, it occupies a remarkable middle ground, carrying an internal reservoir of heat through waters that would cool most predators. The secret lies within the wonderful net, the rete mirabilis described by anatomists centuries ago. Deep inside the body, countless small blood vessels run alongside one another in tightly packed bundles. Warm blood leaving the swimming muscles travels in one direction. Cold blood arriving from the gills travels in the opposite direction. As these streams pass side by side, heat moves across the thin vessel walls. Instead of escaping into the sea, warmth is recycled and returned to the body, where it can be used again. The principle is elegant. Heat generated through movement remains trapped within a constantly circulating exchange system. Every sweep of the tail contributes energy. Every contraction of muscle helps maintain the warmth required for the next contraction. The body becomes both engine and heat reservoir at the same time, conserving resources that would otherwise disappear into the surrounding water. The result is an animal capable of operating under conditions that would challenge many competitors. In water measuring roughly 12 degrees Celsius, the great white can maintain critical swimming muscles at temperatures ranging between 20 and 26 degrees Celsius. Those few degrees create profound differences. Warm muscle fibers contract more rapidly. They generate force more efficiently. They recover more quickly between bursts of activity. The predator remains powerful in places where colder bodies begin to lose their edge. This advantage extends beyond speed alone. Cold water often acts as a natural refuge, slowing predators and prey alike. Yet the great white enters these environments carrying a performance level largely unavailable to surrounding animals. Seals possess their own forms of insulation and warmth, but warmth alone is not enough. The shark's muscles remain prepared for explosive acceleration, allowing it to convert stored energy into movement with extraordinary efficiency. Over time, the implications become even larger. A body capable of retaining heat is also capable of traveling immense distances through varying ocean conditions. Regions that might restrict other species become connected. Feeding grounds, migration corridors, and distant coastlines can all be linked together by an animal that carries part of its preferred operating environment within itself. The ocean remains cold, vast, and constantly shifting, yet the great white moves through it with a degree of physiological independence that feels almost ancient in its refinement. What emerges is not simply a shark adapted to cold water. It is a predator that has partially escaped one of the oldest constraints in marine life, preserving warmth within a world determined to take it away, and carrying that advantage through the endless movement of the sea. If the great white carried only a single set of teeth, its life would be surprisingly brief. The ocean wears everything down. Flesh resists, bone resists more, and even the hardest biological structures gradually surrender to friction, impact, and use. Yet the great white approaches this problem with a solution that feels less like a mouth and more like a continuously renewing system, one that has been refined across immense stretches of evolutionary time. Behind the visible edge of the jaw lies an arrangement hidden from casual view. At any given moment, roughly 7 rows of teeth occupy the mouth, amounting to approximately 300 individual teeth in various stages of development. Only the foremost row performs the daily work. The others remain tucked behind it, waiting patiently beneath the gum tissue. They are not permanent replacements stored for emergencies. They are part of an ongoing cycle, a living conveyor moving steadily forward throughout the shark's life. The active teeth themselves possess a distinctive shape. Each is a broad triangle lined with fine serrations along its edges, measuring roughly 2.5 inches in length in large adults. Their purpose is not to crush. Crushing requires immense pressure focused inward. The great white follows a different strategy. The serrated edges function more like a finely crafted cutting tool, allowing tissue to be sliced apart through movement as much as force. During feeding, the shark often combines the bite with a powerful sideways motion of the head, transforming the teeth into rows of cutting blades, capable of separating blubber, muscle, and even dense bone. Because the teeth encounter such demanding conditions, loss is inevitable. A tooth may break during feeding. It may be damaged through contact with hard surfaces. It may simply wear down after repeated use. For most animals, such losses would create lasting problems. For the great white, they are routine events. As soon as a front tooth is lost, the tooth directly behind it begins moving into position. Within days, the gap disappears. Function continues uninterrupted. The replacement itself is already backed by another developing tooth, and behind that, one another still. This cycle continues year after year with remarkable consistency. Over the course of a long life that may approach 70 years, a single great white can produce, use, and shed approximately 30,000 teeth. Entire generations of teeth pass through the mouth, while the animal itself remains unchanged in appearance. The teeth are temporary. The system that creates them endures. Supporting those teeth is a bite of extraordinary power. Estimates suggest forces approaching 1.8 tons per square inch under ideal conditions. Such numbers are difficult to visualize, but their effects are easier to understand. Researchers have documented great whites severing portions of large marine animals with single bites. In rare encounters, individuals have bitten through components of metal outboard motors, leaving deep impressions in materials far removed from anything encountered in their natural environment. The bite is not merely strong, it is delivered through a design optimized to concentrate force where it matters most. The jaw itself contributes significantly to this capability. Unlike the human jaw, which remains firmly attached in a relatively fixed arrangement, the great white's jaws possess remarkable mobility. They are connected through flexible structures that allow them to project forward and outward during a strike. In the final instant before contact, the jaws can extend beyond their resting position, increasing reach and altering the angle of attack. Teeth that seem tucked neatly within the mouth suddenly advance toward the target, creating a larger effective bite than the skull alone would suggest. Taken together, the teeth, the replacement system, the bite force, and the projecting jaws form something more sophisticated than a simple weapon. They represent a solution to a fundamental problem faced by every large predator: how to keep hunting effectively despite constant wear. The great white answers not with durability alone, but with renewal, replacing what is lost so seamlessly that the machinery of predation never truly pauses. Long before a great white sees anything, long before a silhouette forms against brighter water or movement reveals the presence of another animal, information is already arriving. The ocean is filled with signals that rarely attract human attention. Molecules drift through currents. Vibrations travel immense distances through water. Every living creature leaves traces of itself behind, creating invisible pathways that spread outward and mingle with the sea. To the great white, these traces form a constantly shifting landscape, rich with meaning. Much of that landscape is interpreted through smell. The shark's nostrils are not connected to breathing. They serve an entirely different purpose. Water enters, passes through specialized olfactory sacs, and exits again in a continuous flow. As it does, dissolved molecules encounter dense fields of sensory cells capable of detecting extraordinarily small concentrations of chemical information. Nearly 2/3 of the great white's brain is devoted to processing these signals, a proportion that hints at how important scent has become in the species' understanding of the world. Popular stories often exaggerate this ability, describing sharks that can detect blood from impossible distances. Reality is more restrained, yet no less remarkable. Under favorable conditions, the great white can respond to concentrations approaching 1 part per 10 billion. The comparison often used by researchers involves a single drop dispersed through roughly 10 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Such sensitivity does not mean every trace is instantly located, because the ocean is not a still container. Currents bend scent trails, layers of water separate them. Turbulence tears them apart and recombines them into complex patterns. Finding the source requires interpretation as much as detection. The shark approaches this challenge through subtle asymmetry. Its nostrils are positioned slightly apart, each receiving chemical information at marginally different concentrations and times. When one side encounters a stronger signal than the other, the difference provides directional information. The shark turns, samples again, and turns once more. Over time, a path emerges. What appears from the outside as a sequence of broad, sweeping movements is actually a process of continual refinement, the animal adjusting its course through an invisible gradient of scent. In this way, the ocean becomes textured. Areas of stronger concentration suggest proximity. Areas of weaker concentration suggest distance. A scent trail unfolds across the water like a route that exists only for the senses capable of reading it. The shark follows not a visible track, but a pattern dispersed through the sea itself. Yet smell is only part of the story. Water carries sound far more efficiently than air, and long before an animal comes within visual range, it may already be broadcasting its presence through vibration. The great white possesses acute sensitivity to low-frequency sounds, particularly those produced by irregular movement. A healthy fish swimming normally generates one pattern. A struggling fish produces another. The distinction matters. Researchers have found that great whites respond most strongly to frequencies ranging from approximately 10 to 800 Hz. This range overlaps remarkably well with the sounds produced by wounded or distressed prey. Sudden splashing, erratic motion, and repeated bursts of effort create acoustic signatures that travel through the water over considerable distances. In calm conditions, these signals may remain detectable from hundreds of meters away. The process is almost quiet in its efficiency. A fish breaks rhythm. A seal struggles briefly at the surface. Somewhere beyond sight, a predator receives the message. At first, there is only sound, detached from any image. No shape has appeared. No outline has emerged from the water. There is simply information carried through the sea. Often the shark arrives before the source becomes visible, guided first by scent, then by sound, or sometimes by sound alone. It moves toward a location that exists only as a collection of signals. The animal does not yet possess a complete picture of what lies ahead. Instead, it follows fragments, chemical traces mingling with low frequencies, each one adding another piece to a sensory map that stretches far beyond the limits of vision. There comes a point during the hunt when the ocean stops being a distant collection of clues and begins to resolve into form. Chemical traces have already narrowed the search. Low frequencies have already hinted at movement somewhere ahead. Now, at relatively close range, another sense steps forward. The shark begins to see. The eyes of a great white are larger than many people expect, dark and remarkably well adapted to a world where light is often scarce. Behind each retina sits a reflective layer known as the tapetum lucidum. Rather than allowing incoming light to pass through and disappear, this structure reflects it back across the retina a second time, giving the visual system another opportunity to capture information. It is the same adaptation responsible for the glowing eyes of cats in darkness, in dim coastal water, beneath cloud cover, or during the muted light of dawn and dusk. That extra efficiency becomes valuable. Yet the shark does not perceive the world as humans do. Research suggests great whites possess only a single type of cone cell, making true color vision unlikely. The vibrant palette, familiar to human eyes, may not exist for them at all. Instead, the world appears as a landscape of brightness and shadow, contrast and outline. What matters is not color, but distinction. A dark body crossing a brighter background stands out clearly. A seal viewed against the illuminated surface above becomes a shape that can be identified and tracked with remarkable precision. At distances of roughly 15 to 25 meters, vision becomes increasingly important. Details sharpen. Direction becomes easier to judge. The target is no longer merely a source of scent or sound. It acquires form and movement. Yet, even now, sight is not working alone. The great white rarely relies on a single sense. Instead, information arrives in overlapping layers, each contributing something the others cannot provide. Running from head to tail is one of the most elegant sensory systems in the animal kingdom. Embedded along the body is a structure known as the lateral line, a network of fluid-filled canals capable of detecting minute changes in pressure and vibration. Every moving creature disturbs the water around it. No fish, seal, or dolphin travels without leaving behind a wake. To human perception, these disturbances disappear almost immediately. To the lateral line, they remain rich with information. As the shark approaches, it begins reading these pressure signatures. Distance can be estimated. Direction becomes clearer. Changes in speed reveal whether the target is accelerating, slowing, turning, or maintaining course. The wake becomes a moving record of behavior written directly into the water. Even when visibility declines, the lateral line continues gathering data, allowing the shark to track motion through disturbances too subtle for human senses to notice. The hunt at this stage becomes a convergence of systems. Smell may have initiated the search from nearly a kilometer away. Hearing may have drawn attention from several hundred meters. Vision now contributes detail. The lateral line adds precision. Together they form a sensory architecture that continuously updates the shark's understanding of its surroundings. Then comes the final moment. At a distance measured not in meters but in centimeters, vision suddenly loses its value. The target is too close. The risk of injury increases. Contact is imminent. Great whites often roll their eyes backward or shield them with a protective membrane, temporarily sacrificing sight altogether. For an animal that has relied on layered sensory information throughout the hunt, the decision seems almost paradoxical. Yet another system has been waiting for exactly this distance. Scattered across the snout are tiny pores connected to organs known as the ampullae of Lorenzini, named after the 17th century scientist Stefano Lorenzini, who first described them. Within these structures lies a conductive gel capable of detecting electrical fields of extraordinary weakness, as little as 5 nanovolts per centimeter. Every living body generates such fields. Nerves fire, muscles contract, hearts beat. Life broadcasts itself continuously. The ampullae receive these signals with astonishing sensitivity. A hidden animal buried beneath sand can still be located. A heartbeat concealed from sight can still be detected. In the final fraction of a second before the bite, when vision has been abandoned and other senses have reached their limits, the shark is guided by electricity itself, following the faint biological currents emitted by another living creature through the water. Morning arrives slowly over False Bay. The surface often appears calm enough to erase any hint of what exists beneath it. Light filters downward through layers of water, fading as it descends, until shapes become suggestions and distance becomes uncertainty. Somewhere between the brightness above and the darkness below, one of the most refined hunting behaviors in the natural world begins to unfold. Near Seal Island, great white sharks perform a specialized attack that has become famous among marine biologists for its consistency and precision. The vertical breach is not simply an act of speed. It is a carefully structured sequence built around prediction, geometry, and timing. Every stage depends upon reducing the prey's opportunity to detect danger until the final possible moment. The target is often a young Cape fur seal making its first journeys away from the colony. Studies conducted in these waters have shown that the vast majority of breach attacks focus on juvenile animals rather than adults. Younger seals tend to follow more predictable routes. Their movements contain fewer abrupt changes in direction. To a predator capable of interpreting patterns, predictability becomes an advantage waiting to be exploited. The shark does not chase immediately. Instead, it positions itself beneath the expected path of the seal, allowing the future location of the prey to become more important than its present location. This distinction matters. A pursuit based purely on reaction wastes energy. A pursuit based on prediction transforms movement into calculation. Depth becomes part of the strategy. From approximately 6 meters below the surface, the shark is already difficult to distinguish. At even shallower depths, around 2.5 meters beneath the seal, visibility remains surprisingly poor. Looking downward, the seal does not see a clearly outlined predator. The water below blends into a dark background where contrast disappears. The shark occupies a region where observation becomes unreliable. Its ascent begins quietly. Unlike an animal approaching from the side, the great white presents only a narrow profile as it rises. There is little lateral silhouette to reveal its position. There is no broad shape crossing the field of view. The approach is almost vertical, reducing the amount of information available to the prey. Even the water itself offers few warnings. The attack generates remarkably little disturbance until the final moments when concealment is no longer necessary. Then the physics change. From stillness, the shark accelerates with extraordinary force. Within roughly 2 seconds, it can reach speeds approaching 40 kilometers per hour. Warm muscles, refined hydrodynamics, and immense power stored within the body combine into a single upward movement. Momentum builds rapidly as the shark drives toward the surface. What follows seems almost incompatible with the animal's size. A body weighing approximately 2,000 kilograms does not merely strike the surface. It continues through it. Water erupts outward as the shark breaches completely into open air, sometimes rising as much as 4.5 meters above the sea. For a brief instant, an apex predator, designed entirely for life underwater, becomes airborne. The breach itself often determines the outcome, yet not always. Some seals survive the initial impact. When they do, a second contest begins, one shaped by reaction and agility. The most effective defense observed in surviving seals is rapid zigzag movement, a pattern intended to disrupt prediction and create uncertainty. The shark responds with its own adaptation. Rather than following a rigid path, it can redirect the bite through a rapid lateral movement of the head. Powerful, fast twitch muscles allow the jaws to shift during the attack itself, adjusting trajectory even as the encounter unfolds. The motion is subtle compared to the dramatic breach, yet it plays an important role in maintaining accuracy against an evasive target. Most encounters conclude quickly. At Seal Island, the average duration from the first strike to the end of the hunt is less than 2 minutes. What appears sudden on the surface is actually the culmination of countless small advantages layered together: prediction over reaction, concealment over visibility, precision over chance. The breach endures not because it is spectacular, but because within the particular conditions of False Bay, it remains one of the most efficient hunting techniques the ocean has ever produced. Few animals have been shaped as strongly by storytelling as the great white shark. Long before most people encounter scientific research, they encounter an image, a dark fin, a sudden attack, a predator portrayed as actively seeking human beings. Over time, that image became so familiar that it began to feel inseparable from the animal itself. Repeated across films, headlines, and popular culture until fiction and biology started to occupy the same space. The most influential example arrived in 1975 with the release of Jaws. The film was extraordinarily successful, embedding a particular vision of the great white into the public imagination. In that vision, the shark functioned almost like a villain, deliberately targeting people and returning again and again with purposeful intent. It was compelling storytelling, but it was not an accurate representation of shark behavior. As researchers accumulated decades of observations, tagging studies, forensic bite analyses, and population data, a very different picture emerged. Great whites are not specialized predators of humans. From a biological perspective, people are surprisingly poor prey. We are relatively lean animals with dense skeletons and very little of the energy-rich blubber that marine mammals provide. A predator the size of a great white must constantly balance energy gained against energy spent. Chasing, attacking, and subduing prey all require effort. Seals, sea lions, and other marine mammals offer substantial caloric rewards. Humans generally do not. This helps explain a pattern repeatedly documented in attack investigations. Many encounters involve a single bite, followed by immediate withdrawal. Scientists often describe these incidents as investigatory bites. The shark approaches an unfamiliar object, makes contact, and then departs. In a tragic number of cases, that single bite is still capable of causing severe injury because of the shark's size and power. Yet the behavioral pattern itself differs significantly from what would be expected if humans were being actively hunted as prey. Part of the misunderstanding arises from the way predators interact with novelty. Humans possess hands. We pick things up, turn them over, and examine them. A great white has no equivalent tool. Its mouth serves multiple functions beyond feeding. When confronted with something unfamiliar, the shark may investigate through physical contact. The difficulty is that even a tentative bite, delivered by an animal weighing roughly 2,000 kilograms, carries consequences far beyond those of most curious animals. The statistical record reflects this distinction. Across all shark species worldwide, the annual number of unprovoked attacks remains relatively small. Great whites account for roughly a third of those incidents, yet even within that category, most are non-fatal. Many involve a single bite and no sustained attack. The shark leaves rather than continuing the encounter. When viewed against the scale of global human activity, the numbers become even more striking. The annual worldwide average of deaths attributed to great white sharks typically falls between approximately 4 and 6 people. Other causes of accidental death, including domestic dogs, vending machine accidents, and falling coconuts, have exceeded those figures in various years. The disparity between public perception and statistical reality is substantial. Unfortunately, perception has consequences. Following the release of Jaws, fear translated into action. Throughout parts of the United States and Australia, targeted shark hunting intensified during the years that followed. Recreational fishers, commercial operators, and organized culling efforts pursued great whites that were already naturally uncommon. At the time, little legal protection existed. Population declines that had begun through fishing pressure and incidental capture were accelerated by a cultural climate that increasingly viewed the shark not as a wildlife species, but as an enemy. The irony is difficult to ignore. An animal refined by millions of years of evolution became trapped inside a story written over the course of a few decades. The scientific record does not describe a relentless hunter of humans. It describes a large marine predator adapted for prey very different from ourselves, occasionally making mistakes, sometimes acting out of curiosity, and living with the consequences of a reputation far larger than the reality that created it. Maps suggest certainty. They show coastlines, distances, and destinations neatly arranged across a page. The life of a great white shark rarely follows such simplicity. For much of the year, an individual may disappear beyond the horizon and remain absent for months, crossing vast stretches of open ocean where no landmarks break the surface and no visible pathways mark the route ahead. What appears from land as emptiness is, for the shark, part of a connected world extending across entire ocean basins. The great white is not an animal of fixed territory. Feeding grounds may be revisited seasonally, but between those returns lies continual movement. Individuals travel along coastlines, across deep pelagic waters, and through regions separated by thousands of kilometers. Scientists have linked these migrations to changing water temperatures, shifting prey populations, reproductive behavior, and environmental signals that remain only partially understood. The result is a life spent in motion, guided by patterns written into the ocean itself. One of the most remarkable examples emerged in 2004. A female great white, known as Nicole, was fitted with a tracking device off the coast of South Africa. What followed transformed scientific understanding of the species. Nicole traveled from South Africa to the western coast of Australia, covering approximately 11,000 kilometers in 99 days. Her average pace exceeded 100 kilometers per day. Then, rather than remaining there, she reversed course and completed the return journey. By the end of the migration, she had traveled more than 20,000 kilometers in roughly 9 months, setting a record at the time for the fastest documented return migration of any known marine animal. The scale of the journey is striking, but so is the consistency. Nicole did not wander randomly through the ocean. The route showed purpose. Large sections of the voyage unfolded in relatively direct lines, suggesting that the shark possessed a reliable method of maintaining orientation across immense distances. Researchers examining the tracking data noticed another intriguing detail. More than half of the migration occurred near the surface. For extended periods, Nicole remained within a layer of water where the positions of the sun and moon would have been visible. Some scientists proposed that celestial cues may contribute to navigation. The idea sounds almost ancient, recalling the techniques once used by sailors crossing oceans before modern instruments existed, yet the possibility remains scientifically plausible. The sky provides stable reference points, and animals throughout nature have evolved ways of using them. The sea offers another guide as well. Evidence from related shark species demonstrates sensitivity to Earth's magnetic field, allowing orientation through information imperceptible to human senses. Great whites appear capable of similar abilities. Year after year, individuals return to specific feeding areas with remarkable accuracy. The precision of these movements suggests more than simple memory. It hints at an internal navigation system capable of reading large-scale features of the planet itself. The warm-blooded adaptations carried within the shark's body play a crucial role in making such migrations possible. Retaining heat allows sustained performance in cold water and reduces many of the limitations faced by fully ectothermic species. As a result, the migration range of the great white exceeds that of the humpback whale. Journeys that cross deep, cold stretches of ocean become achievable because the animal carries part of its physiological advantage wherever it goes. Far from any coastline lies one of the most curious destinations on these migrations. Between Baja California and Hawaii stretches a region of open Pacific Ocean that researchers have nicknamed the White Shark Café. Sharks from across the eastern Pacific converge there each year, gathering in waters that appear, at first glance, unremarkable. Once they arrive, many begin a behavior that remains difficult to explain. They repeatedly descend to depths, approaching 900 meters, before returning upward and repeating the cycle again. The purpose of these deep excursions remains uncertain. Food alone does not fully explain the pattern. Navigation, reproduction, and social interactions have all been proposed as possibilities. For now, the White Shark Café remains one of the ocean's quiet mysteries, a reminder that even an animal studied for decades still follows routes and rituals that remain partly hidden within the vast geography of the sea. Far from continental shelves, beyond familiar migration routes and coastal feeding grounds, there is a region of the Pacific Ocean that appears almost empty. The surface offers few clues. No islands break the horizon. No dramatic currents announce themselves. To a passing ship, it would seem like another stretch of open sea, vast and undistinguished. Yet, year after year, great white sharks travel enormous distances to reach this place, converging upon a destination that researchers eventually named the White Shark Café. The location lies roughly 2,400 kilometers west of Baja California, suspended between the North American coast and Hawaii. Unlike productive coastal ecosystems, where food concentrations often reveal themselves through seabirds, marine mammals, or visible schools of fish, the White Shark Café appears strangely quiet. There are no obvious signs explaining why some of the ocean's most capable predators gather there with such consistency. The mystery deepened once electronic tags began revealing what happened after the sharks arrived. Individuals approaching from different directions entered the region and then began performing a behavior that few scientists had anticipated. Rather than remaining near the surface or moving steadily through the area, they repeatedly descended into the depths. Some dives reached 300 meters, others extended to 600. Occasionally, individuals descended to nearly 900 meters before returning upward. The pattern repeated again and again, often many times within a single day. Particularly striking was the difference between males and females. Both sexes visited the area, yet males appeared far more committed to these repeated vertical journeys. Their movements resembled a rhythm. A rapid descent carried them downward through darkening layers of water. Then came a slower ascent back toward brighter depths. Once near the upper ocean, the process began again. Researchers from Stanford University and the Monterey Bay Aquarium intensified efforts to understand this behavior during the late 2010s, deploying increasingly sophisticated tags capable of recording depth, location, temperature, and movement with remarkable precision. The expectations seemed reasonable. Perhaps the dives were linked to a hidden food source. Perhaps some concentration of prey existed at depths rarely observed directly. The data offered only a partial answer. Far below the surface lies what oceanographers call the deep scattering layer, a vast community of small fishes, squid, and drifting organisms that migrate vertically through the water column. Sonar often detects this layer as a diffuse cloud suspended in darkness. The White Shark Café contains such a layer, and the sharks certainly encounter it during their descents. Yet, calculations suggested that the available prey was insufficient to fully explain the behavior. For an animal as large and energetically demanding as a great white, The repeated cost of diving hundreds of meters seemed difficult to justify through feeding alone. As a result, the White Shark Café remains one of the most intriguing, unresolved puzzles in shark biology. One possibility involves reproduction. Males may be using these dives as part of a courtship system invisible to human observers. Deep water differs dramatically from the surface. Pressure increases. Temperature changes. Sound behaves differently. Chemical signals disperse under different conditions. It is conceivable that certain biological cues become more effective at depth, creating an environment where communication between individuals can occur in ways not possible near the surface. Another possibility concerns navigation. Earlier clues suggested that great whites possess sensitivity to Earth's magnetic field, allowing them to maintain astonishing accuracy during long migrations. Some researchers have proposed that deep dives may help sharks calibrate this internal guidance system. The seafloor contains subtle magnetic variations, patterns woven into the geology of the planet itself. By descending toward greater depths, a shark may be gathering information about its position within a much larger navigational framework. For now, certainty remains elusive. The tags reveal where the sharks go and how they move, but not fully why. In an age when satellites circle the globe and oceans are mapped with extraordinary detail, a gathering place in the middle of the Pacific still guards its purpose. Great whites continue arriving from distant waters, descending into darkness, rising again, and repeating the pattern as they have for years, carrying out a behavior that remains partly hidden beyond the reach of present knowledge. A great white shark does not need to make a kill to change an ecosystem. In many places, it does not even need to be present. The possibility of its presence is often enough. Long before a predator appears, other animals have already adjusted their behavior around the risk that it might. This influence spreads quietly through coastal waters, shaping decisions made by creatures that may never encounter the shark directly. Ecologists sometimes describe this phenomenon as a landscape of fear. The phrase sounds dramatic, yet the reality is surprisingly subtle. Animals living alongside predators do not spend their lives in constant flight. Instead, they make countless small adjustments. They choose one route instead of another. They feed at different depths. They travel in groups where they might otherwise travel alone. Each decision appears minor in isolation. Together, they reshape entire ecosystems. Along coastlines inhabited by great whites, seal colonies provide one of the clearest examples. Individual seals learn that certain channels, approaches, and stretches of water carry greater risk than others. Their movements begin to concentrate in areas perceived as safer. Routes become predictable. Some feeding grounds are visited less often. Other locations receive more traffic. The consequences extend beyond the seals themselves. Kelp forests, for instance, experience these behavioral changes indirectly. Fish communities living among the kelp encounter different levels of predation depending on where seals choose to hunt. Areas heavily used by seals experience one pattern of ecological pressure. Areas largely avoided experience another. The great white may never physically enter many of these locations, yet its influence reaches them through decisions made by animals responding to its existence. This is one of the defining characteristics of an apex predator. Its role is not limited to consumption. It governs relationships throughout the food web by shaping behavior as much as population size. The predator becomes part of the environmental context, as significant in its own way as tides, currents, or seasonal changes. When that influence disappears, The effects often become visible surprisingly quickly. Studies examining regions where large predators have declined repeatedly reveal similar patterns. Species previously constrained by predation begin expanding their range and increasing their activity. Those growing populations place greater pressure on the organisms beneath them. Herbivores consume more vegetation. Mid-level predators consume more prey. Gradually, the structure of the ecosystem begins to reorganize itself. The process is known as a trophic cascade. Rather than moving from the bottom upward, change begins near the top and travels downward through successive levels of biological interaction. A shift affecting one predator eventually alters animals several steps removed from the original event. One of the most revealing modern examples emerged along the coast near Gansby in South Africa. Earlier, the arrival of the orcas known as Port and Starboard had already transformed the behavior of local great whites. As the sharks abandoned areas they had occupied for years, a vacancy appeared within the ecosystem. Other species began responding almost immediately. Bronze whaler sharks moved into some of the territory previously dominated by great whites. Their expansion seemed, at first, like a simple replacement, yet the story did not stop there. The same orcas responsible for displacing the great whites also hunted bronze whalers. The new arrivals inherited the same danger. At the same time, Cape fur seals began appearing in areas where they had rarely been observed before. Without consistent pressure from large shark predators, movement patterns changed. Feeding opportunities expanded into locations previously avoided. Those shifts carried consequences for other species sharing the region. Among the affected animals were endangered African penguins. Both penguins and seals depend heavily on small pelagic fish. As seal distributions changed, competition for these resources intensified in certain areas. The effects were indirect, yet measurable. A sequence that began with two orcas targeting a handful of great white sharks eventually extended outward through multiple layers of the ecosystem. What emerges from examples like Gansby is a picture of dominance more complex than simple power. The great white shapes the ocean not merely through what it catches, but through what other animals do because it exists. Its influence travels along pathways of behavior, spreading outward into habitats it may never enter, quietly participating in the architecture that holds entire marine communities together. For years, the waters off Gansby followed a familiar rhythm. Researchers launched survey boats, cage diving operators traveled established routes, and great white sharks appeared with enough consistency that their presence seemed woven into the identity of the coastline itself. Certain seasons brought greater abundance than others, yet the pattern remained dependable. Then, during the austral autumn of 2017, that rhythm broke. At first, the change appeared subtle. Boats returned with fewer sightings than expected. A day that might once have produced several encounters yielded none. Such fluctuations were not unusual on their own. Marine ecosystems are dynamic places, influenced by weather, prey movement, and countless variables beyond immediate observation. The initial assumption was that conditions had shifted temporarily. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The absence persisted long enough that researchers began looking for explanations beyond normal seasonal variation. The sharks had not simply become difficult to find. In many areas, they seemed to have vanished altogether. Then another development complicated the mystery. Carcasses began washing ashore. The bodies belonged to great white sharks, and the wounds they carried were unlike those typically associated with accidents, disease, or scavenging. Again and again, investigators observed a striking pattern. The sharks had been opened along nearly identical lines. The injuries appeared precise rather than chaotic. Internal organs were missing, particularly the liver, and in some cases the heart as well. Of the earliest carcasses recovered, nearly all displayed the same distinctive signature. Something was targeting great whites with remarkable consistency. As evidence accumulated, attention focused on two unusual visitors that had already been observed in South African waters. They were adult male orcas, known to researchers as Port and Starboard. Their names came from the distinctive lean of their dorsal fins, one bent noticeably toward the left, the other toward the right. They had been documented in the region since at least 2015, but only gradually did the scale of their influence become clear. The methods employed by these orcas revealed an extraordinary level of specialization. Great whites are formidable predators, yet they possess vulnerabilities. One of the most important involves a condition known as tonic immobility. When a shark is inverted and held upside down, its nervous system can enter a temporary paralyzed state. Movement ceases, resistance fades. The animal becomes almost trance-like. Observations and forensic evidence suggested that Port and Starboard had learned to exploit this response. The attack appears to begin with a forceful impact, stunning the shark. The orcas then manipulate the animal into an inverted position and maintain control until tonic immobility takes hold. Unable to swim normally, the shark eventually suffocates. What follows is notable for its efficiency. The orcas access the body cavity and remove the liver, an organ exceptionally rich in energy-dense oils and sometimes comprising roughly a quarter of the shark's body weight. In several cases, the heart was removed as well. What transformed the event from a series of unusual predation incidents into something much larger was the reaction of the surviving sharks. Over the following years, researchers led by Alison Towner tracked tagged individuals throughout the region. The pattern that emerged was difficult to ignore. Sharks that had returned reliably to the same feeding grounds altered their behavior dramatically. Individuals departed areas shortly after the arrival of the orcas. Some moved considerable distances away. Locations that once hosted regular sightings experienced extended periods of absence. In previous years, temporary disappearances might last days. Now the gaps stretched into months. In certain bays, entire seasons passed without the return of the sharks that had once defined those waters. Survey records reflected the shift with startling clarity. Places known internationally for predictable great white encounters sometimes produced none at all. Towner described the phenomenon as a large-scale avoidance. The phrase captures something important. Port and Starboard were not merely killing sharks, they were changing the behavior of sharks that survived. Across the coastline, an apex predator that had shaped local ecosystems for generations began withdrawing from habitats it had long occupied. The ocean had not become empty. It had simply rearranged itself around the arrival of two hunters capable of turning one of its oldest predators into prey. Memory leaves traces in the ocean, though not in the way it does on land. There are no paths worn into soil, no visible marks showing where an animal has been. Yet the movements of great white sharks reveal something remarkably similar. Individuals return to the same feeding grounds year after year, arriving with a consistency that suggests more than instinct alone. They remember where food has been found before. They remember routes across immense distances. They remember places that have proven valuable. For a long time, researchers assumed these memories represented one of the foundations of great white behavior. Then the sharks left. What followed the arrival of Port and Starboard challenged a deeply rooted assumption about apex predators. Popular imagination often treats such animals as creatures existing beyond fear, occupying the top of a hierarchy where nothing compels retreat. Reality proved more complex. The disappearance of great whites from South African waters demonstrated that even an apex predator carries within it an understanding of danger. The response was not random. Tagged sharks did not merely shift a short distance along the coast before resuming familiar patterns. Many abandoned regions they had used repeatedly for years. Some traveled hundreds of kilometers away from established feeding grounds. Places that had once drawn them back with remarkable reliability suddenly lost their pull. This detail matters because the behavior involved a direct conflict between competing priorities. Returning to a productive feeding area offers obvious advantages. The shark already possesses knowledge of the environment. It understands local prey movements. It has effectively solved a problem that would otherwise require time and energy. Under normal circumstances, memory encourages return. Yet, memory was overridden. Something stronger entered the calculation. Evidence suggested that sharks encountering the threat represented by the orcas did not simply associate danger with a specific point on a map. Their avoidance expanded outward. Entire regions became suspect. The response was broader than a reflex and more enduring than a momentary reaction. In its simplest form, instinct links a stimulus to an action. Touch something hot and withdraw. Encounter danger and flee. What researchers observed in these sharks appeared more sophisticated. The animals behaved as though they had incorporated new information into an existing model of the world. An encounter produced not only an immediate response, but also a lasting adjustment in future behavior. This distinction carries important implications. A shark, capable of altering its movements across vast geographic areas based on prior experience, is demonstrating a form of learning. It is retaining information, applying it later, and extending that lesson beyond the original circumstance. The behavior resembles threat assessment more than automatic reaction. Such findings gradually changed how many scientists viewed great white cognition. For decades, public perception often reduced the species to a simple archetype, an efficient predator driven almost entirely by instinct. The accumulating evidence pointed elsewhere. Great whites navigate immense migrations, return to precise locations, modify hunting strategies under different conditions, and now appeared capable of broad behavioral adaptation in response to danger. The events near Gansbai offered a particularly vivid example because the response carried a clear cost. Leaving productive habitat is not a trivial decision for any large predator. It means abandoning familiar territory, established opportunities, and known resources. Remaining carried risk, departing carried cost. The sharks chose the option that increased the likelihood of survival. Viewed from this perspective, their retreat begins to look less like defeat and more like strategy. The same capacities that make a great white an effective hunter also help it avoid becoming prey. The ability to evaluate circumstances, update behavior, and act on accumulated experience serves both purposes. Predation and survival emerge from the same underlying architecture. One directs attention outward toward opportunity. The other directs attention inward toward risk. In that sense, the disappearance of the Gansbai sharks revealed something quietly profound. Fear was not evidence of weakness. It was evidence of awareness. The ocean's most iconic predator demonstrated that intelligence is not measured solely by the ability to dominate a landscape. Sometimes it appears in the ability to recognize when dominance no longer applies and to leave before the cost of staying becomes irreversible. There is a tendency to imagine intelligence in forms that resemble our own. Hands manipulating objects, voices exchanging information, faces displaying expression. The ocean offers different possibilities. Much of what a great white shark knows is carried through senses unfamiliar to human experience, processed by a brain shaped for a world of currents, pressure gradients, chemical traces, and electrical signals. For many years, scientists viewed that brain primarily as a sensory machine. Increasingly, evidence suggests something more layered, a mind capable not only of receiving information, but of learning from it. The first clues emerged through long-term observation. Researchers who spent years documenting individual sharks noticed patterns that resisted simple explanation. Certain animals behaved consistently whenever they appeared. Some approached boats readily, circling with apparent curiosity and investigating new objects with confidence. Others remained distant and cautious, maintaining space even under similar conditions. These differences persisted across multiple encounters and across many years. In behavioral science, consistency matters. A single action may be coincidence. Repeated actions forming a stable pattern suggest something deeper. The documented differences among individual great whites became significant enough that researchers began using a familiar term, personality. Not personality in the human sense, but stable behavioral tendencies that distinguish one individual from another. Some sharks are reliably bold, others are reliably reserved. The distinctions endure over time. This persistence hints at an animal that is not merely reacting to the moment. Experience appears to shape behavior, and behavior remains shaped long afterward. Learning provides another window into this process. Great whites are capable of associative learning, linking one event with another and modifying future actions accordingly. In areas where boats regularly operate, sharks can learn that particular sounds precede opportunities for food. The low mechanical rhythm of an engine or the vibration of a specific frequency may become meaningful through repetition. The sound itself offers no nourishment, yet it acquires significance because the shark remembers what has followed it before. Memory appears again in their movements across the ocean. Migration routes are often described as though they were automatic programs running inside the animal. The reality seems more sophisticated. Great whites return not only to broad regions, but to remarkably specific locations. Feeding grounds, migration corridors, and gathering sites are revisited with impressive precision. Navigation explains how a shark reaches a destination. Memory helps explain why it returns to the same destination repeatedly. Researchers studying long-lived individuals have often remarked upon this consistency. A shark may disappear into the open ocean for months, traveling across immense distances, only to reappear in a familiar place at the expected season. The route has been traveled before. The solution has been learned and retained. Observations made by shark researcher Leonard Campagno added another intriguing layer. During encounters in South African waters, he described great whites lifting their heads above the surface in a behavior known as spy hopping. On several occasions, he reported sharks appearing to examine people aboard a vessel one by one, directing attention toward each individual in sequence. The interpretation of such behavior requires caution, yet the action itself is well documented. The shark is gathering information about something it cannot fully evaluate from beneath the surface. Perhaps most fascinating is the possibility that great whites inhabit a sensory world organized around scent to a degree difficult for humans to imagine. Chemical traces drift through the ocean, carrying information about identity, condition, and presence. Researchers have speculated that individual sharks may recognize one another through these signatures, distinguishing potential mates, rivals, and familiar individuals by combinations of molecules dissolved in water. In such a world, a scent trail may function much like a face does for us. Recognition emerges not through appearance, but through chemistry. Memory, learning, and perception become intertwined, creating a portrait of the great white that differs sharply from the old image of a simple predator. Beneath the power and efficiency lies an animal continually gathering information, storing it, and carrying it forward through a life spent navigating one of the most complex environments on Earth. Movement defines the great white so completely that for much of scientific history, researchers struggled to imagine the animal at rest. It seemed built around motion. Water flowed across its gills only while it swam. Oceans were crossed through relentless migration. Hunts unfolded through constant adjustment and acceleration. Everything about the shark appeared to support a simple conclusion. If it stopped moving, it stopped functioning. From that assumption came another. If the shark must keep swimming to breathe, then meaningful sleep seemed impossible. The resting states familiar in mammals appeared incompatible with a life spent in perpetual motion. For decades, many scientists regarded sleep in great whites as little more than a biological contradiction. The reality, as often happens in nature, proved more subtle. Great whites are indeed obligate ram ventilators. Oxygen enters the body as water passes continuously over the gills, and that process depends upon forward movement. Yet breathing and rest are not necessarily the same thing. An animal may remain in motion while reducing activity elsewhere. Gradually, observations began suggesting that the relationship between movement and awareness was more flexible than previously believed. A particularly important clue emerged off the coast of Mexico during the early 2020s. Researchers documented a large female great white known as Emma displaying behavior unlike the active cruising normally associated with the species. She moved slowly through shallow water, maintaining a stable orientation within a gentle current. Her pace was unhurried. Her responses appeared muted. Rather than actively propelling herself through the environment, she seemed to be allowing the surrounding water to perform much of the work required for ventilation. The footage attracted attention because it suggested the possibility of a sleep-like state. The shark was not unconscious in the mammalian sense. There was no indication of a complete shutdown of awareness. Instead, researchers proposed that great whites may enter periods of significantly reduced activity while continuing to swim. During these phases, the animal remains alive to the world around it, yet less engaged with that world than it would be during active hunting, migration, or exploration. This distinction is important because the shark's brain differs profoundly from that of mammals. Human sleep involves highly organized cycles, shifting between different neurological states throughout the night. Great whites possess no known equivalent. Evidence instead points toward intervals during which sensory processing and behavioral responsiveness diminish without disappearing entirely. Near the surface, particularly in warm and oxygen-rich waters, conditions may favor such states. The shark can maintain steady movement while reducing the intensity of active engagement. Its remarkable sensory systems, ordinarily tuned to detect subtle signals across great distances, appear to become quieter, not silent, merely less attentive. Exactly what the animal experiences during these intervals remains unknown. Shark neuroscience remains a young field, and many of its central questions remain unanswered. Researchers continue debating whether these low-activity periods should truly be called sleep, or whether they represent a different biological phenomenon altogether. The distinction matters scientifically, yet the underlying mystery remains similar. A creature long associated with perpetual vigilance appears capable of stepping back, if only partially, from the constant flow of information surrounding it. What is known comes largely from behavior. During these reduced activity phases, great whites respond less readily to stimuli that would normally provoke investigation. Sudden changes in the environment are more likely to be ignored. Reactions become slower. The animal appears temporarily detached from the sensory richness that usually defines its existence. There is something quietly fascinating about that image. The great white often appears as a symbol of uninterrupted purpose, a body engineered for motion and awareness. Yet, even this animal seems to require moments when the demands of the world are softened. The currents continue to move, water continues to pass across the gills, the body continues its steady journey through the sea. Beneath that ongoing motion, however, the intensity fades for a time, and one of the ocean's most attentive predators drifts into a state that remains only partially understood, suspended somewhere between wakefulness and rest. Many of the ocean's most successful animals follow a simple strategy: produce enormous numbers of offspring, release them into the sea, and allow probability to do the rest. Countless fish, invertebrates, and marine organisms depend upon abundance. Losses are expected because replacements are produced in overwhelming numbers. The great white shark follows a very different path. Its approach is slower, quieter, and far more vulnerable to disruption. The timeline begins long before birth. Male great whites do not reach sexual maturity until roughly 26 years of age. Females mature even later, often not reproducing until their early 30s. By the time a female produces her first offspring, many animals have already completed entire lifetimes. Decades pass before a single new generation begins. Once reproduction occurs, the pace remains measured. Gestation lasts approximately 1 year, longer than a human pregnancy. During that period, developing young remain within the mother's body, protected from the outside world, yet engaged in a remarkable competition among themselves. Unlike many sharks that deposit eggs externally, great whites are ovoviviparous. The eggs hatch internally, and the embryos continue developing within the womb. Life begins as a contest. The mother continuously produces unfertilized eggs that serve as nourishment for the developing embryos. The process is known as upage, literally the consumption of eggs. Inside the womb, the young feed on this steady supply, growing larger and stronger while still months away from birth. Evidence suggests that the largest embryos may sometimes consume smaller siblings as well. By the time birth approaches, only the strongest individuals remain. The result is an unusual trade. Rather than producing vast numbers of vulnerable young, the great white invests heavily in a small number of offspring already capable of survival. When pups finally enter the ocean, they arrive at an impressive size, typically between roughly 1 and 1.5 meters in length. They are not larvae. They are not helpless juveniles. They are functioning predators from the moment they begin life outside the womb. Yet, independence comes immediately. There is no nursery attended by parents, no instruction, no protection. The mother departs, and the young shark enters the ocean alone. Every skill required for survival must already exist. Hunting begins almost at once. The first days of life unfold without guidance, in an environment populated by larger predators, competing sharks, and countless hazards. Even after a successful birth, reproduction remains infrequent. Researchers believe females may require at least a year of recovery before becoming fertile again. In practice, Reproductive events likely occur only every few years. The intervals between litters are long, and the opportunities to produce offspring are surprisingly limited. When viewed across an entire lifespan, the numbers become striking. A female living approximately 70 years and beginning reproduction in her early 30s may produce only a handful of litters. The total number of offspring generated across decades may amount to merely dozens rather than hundreds or thousands. Of those young, only a fraction survive long enough to reach maturity themselves. This helps explain an important reality often hidden behind the species' reputation. Great whites feel common in imagination because their image is so powerful. In biological terms, they are produced very slowly. The ocean generates far fewer of them than many people assume. Adding to the mystery is the fact that one of the most important moments in the species' life cycle remains unseen. Despite decades of observation, tracking programs, and scientific study, mating has never been directly documented in the wild, not once. Researchers infer much of what they know from indirect evidence. Females frequently carry scars consistent with mating behavior, deep bite marks left by males gripping them during courtship and reproduction. Information also comes from examining embryos and understanding their development. The act itself remains hidden. Somewhere within the vastness of the ocean, great whites continue a reproductive cycle refined over millions of years, yet they do so beyond direct human observation. The species that appears so visible in documentaries, headlines, and public imagination still guards one of the most fundamental parts of its existence, behind a curtain of distance and depth, continuing a slow strategy that values survival over abundance and patience over numbers. Counting great white sharks sounds straightforward until one imagines the scale of the task. An animal capable of crossing entire ocean basins, diving hundreds of meters into darkness, and appearing unpredictably along thousands of kilometers of coastline does not lend itself easily to census taking. Unlike terrestrial animals confined by landscapes that can be surveyed directly, great whites spend much of their lives moving through a three-dimensional environment that conceals them almost completely. As a result, one of the simplest sounding questions in marine biology remains surprisingly difficult to answer. No precise global count exists. Researchers instead rely on estimates built from tagging programs, genetic studies, photographic identification, population models, and regional surveys. Each method captures only part of the picture. Together, they provide an approximation, though often with substantial uncertainty. The challenge is compounded by the fact that great whites are naturally uncommon. Even healthy populations are sparse compared with many marine species. For years, one of the most frequently cited global estimates suggested that fewer than 3,500 great white sharks might exist worldwide. Yet population studies sometimes produce dramatically different regional figures. Research conducted in eastern Australasia estimated a population exceeding 5,000 individuals within that region alone. Elsewhere, numbers appear far lower. Such variation reflects both the complexity of the species and the difficulty of measuring it accurately. The uncertainty becomes even more apparent when examining locations famous for their sharks. Gansby, along the coast of South Africa, was long regarded as one of the densest great white aggregation sites on Earth. Over several years of study, researchers identified slightly more than 500 individual sharks and estimated a local population numbering only in the hundreds. For an animal so deeply embedded in public imagination, the actual numbers can seem unexpectedly modest. What remains consistent across most scientific assessments is the broader trend. The International Union for Conservation of Nature currently classifies the great white shark as vulnerable. This designation places the species one step below endangered and reflects concern about long-term population decline. Across multiple generations, assessments indicate a substantial reduction in global numbers. Exact percentages vary between studies, but the overall direction remains the same. The population is not expanding, it is shrinking. Part of the reason lies in the reproductive strategy explored earlier. Great whites simply do not replace themselves quickly. An animal that takes decades to mature and produces relatively few offspring cannot recover rapidly from sustained losses. Even under ideal conditions, population growth proceeds slowly. Researchers estimate that if all significant human pressures vanished immediately, the species would still require many years to substantially increase its numbers. Some conservation databases reflect this vulnerability through numerical risk assessments. Great whites rank among the shark species considered most susceptible to extinction pressure. The reason is not weakness, it is mathematics. Slow reproduction creates little margin for error. The threats themselves are well understood. Many sharks die as unintended victims of commercial fishing operations. Longlines and gill nets designed for other species frequently capture great whites incidentally. Some animals are released, others do not survive the encounter. Additional pressure comes from targeted hunting. Fins remain valuable in certain markets. Teeth are sold as collectibles. Jaws have commanded extraordinary prices among private buyers and trophy collectors. Coastal habitat degradation introduces another challenge. Juvenile sharks depend upon specific nearshore environments during critical stages of development. As those habitats change through human activity, the risks facing young sharks increase. Climate-driven shifts in prey distribution add further complications, altering migration patterns and sometimes drawing juveniles into regions where predation by orcas becomes more likely. Taken individually, each pressure may seem manageable. Together, they accumulate. There is a quiet irony in this reality. The great white has endured environmental upheavals that transformed entire planets. Its lineage persisted through mass extinctions, shifting oceans, changing climates, and millions of years of evolutionary change. Yet the pressures now shaping its future originate largely from a single source. Not a rival predator, not a geological catastrophe, not a collapse of the oceans themselves. The challenge comes from a species capable of crossing the world in hours, extracting value from teeth and fins, and altering ecosystems faster than evolutionary adaptation can respond. There are moments in Earth's history when continuity itself seems improbable. Entire ecosystems vanish, familiar forms disappear from the fossil record, and the living world is forced to begin again with whatever fragments remain. Across those vast intervals, the ancestors of modern sharks drift like a thread through a tapestry, repeatedly torn apart and rewoven. The lineage that would eventually give rise to the great white did not pass through a stable world. It crossed a sequence of planetary crises so immense that each one erased dominant forms of life on a scale difficult to imagine. Around 443 million years ago, during the Ordovician Silurian extinction, advancing ice sheets locked enormous volumes of water into glaciers. Sea levels fell. Shallow tropical seas, among the richest habitats on Earth at the time, shrank dramatically. Roughly 85% of marine species disappeared, yet somewhere within those altered oceans, early shark relatives endured. Millions of years later came the late Devonian extinction. Forests spread across the continents for the first time, reshaping atmospheric chemistry and altering the flow of nutrients into the seas. The consequences unfolded slowly, but relentlessly. Entire branches of life faded away. Approximately 3/4 of all species vanished. The shark lineage remained. The greatest trial arrived near 252 million years ago. Scientists call it the Great Dying. Vast volcanic eruptions transformed the atmosphere and oceans. Temperatures rose, oxygen levels collapsed. In some marine regions, the water itself became hostile to complex aerobic life. Nearly 96% of marine species disappeared. Reef systems that had flourished for millions of years collapsed. Countless evolutionary stories ended permanently. Yet the lineage continued, not unchanged, not untouched, but alive. Later came the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, around 201 million years ago. Once again, volcanic activity reshaped the planet. Ecosystems fractured. Roughly 80% of species were lost. The shark lineage continued. Then, 66 million years ago, a mountain-sized asteroid struck the Earth. Darkness spread through the atmosphere. Food webs failed across land and sea. The great marine reptiles that had ruled the oceans, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and many others, vanished forever. Approximately 3/4 of all species disappeared. The shark lineage continued. Through each catastrophe, the pattern repeated. Entire dynasties rose and fell while the basic shark design persisted. Continents drifted apart. Oceans opened and closed. Climate zones migrated across the globe. Still, the lineage endured, carrying ancient solutions through worlds that barely resembled one another. Part of the explanation lies in flexibility. Sharks were never dependent on a single habitat, a single prey species, or a single way of life. Across deep time, they occupied coastlines, open oceans, shallow seas, and darker waters beyond sunlight. Some grew enormous, others remained small. Some specialized, others adapted. Evolution had produced not one answer, but many. When catastrophe removed one path, another often remained. Their cartilaginous skeletons required fewer resources to build than heavy bony frames. Their senses allowed efficient hunting in environments where visibility changed dramatically. Many species matured slowly and conserved energy with remarkable effectiveness. Survival did not come from invincibility. It came from resilience. The fossil record suggests a lineage capable of bending without breaking, adjusting without losing its identity. Viewed from this perspective, the modern great white becomes part of a much older story. Beneath the familiar outline moves the inheritance of survivors whose ancestors crossed frozen seas, oxygen-starved oceans, volcanic ages, and the aftermath of an asteroid impact. The animal gliding through today's waters carries within it the accumulated memory of worlds that no longer exist, a living continuation of a line that has already witnessed the end of almost everything. Long before a great white appears in the modern ocean, its survival strategy is already written into the architecture of its body. Not in muscle, not in speed, and not even in its famous teeth, but in a framework so light and efficient that it has carried shark lineages across spans of time almost impossible to comprehend. Unlike the heavy skeletons of bony fishes, the great white's internal structure is built almost entirely from cartilage, a material that demands less energy to produce, less energy to maintain, and less energy to repair. It grants flexibility without sacrificing strength, allowing a large predator to move through water with remarkable efficiency. Across millions upon millions of years, that efficiency mattered. Every calorie saved became a small advantage. Every advantage accumulated across generations. The same trait that leaves so little evidence behind for paleontologists may also be one of the reasons the lineage endured. Cartilage vanishes quickly after death. Bone can linger in stone for ages, preserving the outline of an extinct creature. Cartilage rarely offers that opportunity. As a result, much of shark history survives only in fragments, scattered clues carried forward from vanished seas. Those clues are teeth, oceans that erased skeletons preserved jaws one tooth at a time. Countless specimens have been recovered from rock layers spanning immense stretches of geological history, creating a record unlike that of almost any other marine predator. Through those teeth, a pattern emerges. The familiar triangular shape, edged with fine serrations and designed for cutting rather than crushing, appears again and again. Variations exist, reflecting changing species and changing environments, yet the underlying geometry remains strikingly consistent. Evolution altered details, refined proportions, and adjusted performance, but it never abandoned the basic design. That persistence suggests something important. The tooth worked. It worked well enough that natural selection repeatedly preserved its essential form through changing climates, shifting coastlines, and entirely different marine communities. When a design continues appearing across immense spans of time, it often reflects a solution that remains effective under many conditions rather than only one. The same principle extends beyond anatomy into ecology. The great white is not tightly bound to a single source of food or a single place in the ocean. It moves between habitats, exploiting opportunities wherever they appear. Fish, marine mammals, sea turtles, seabirds, and even the drifting remains of larger animals can become part of its diet. It patrols productive coastlines, open ocean corridors, and waters extending far below the reach of sunlight. Such flexibility may appear ordinary when viewed in the present, yet across deep time, it becomes extraordinarily valuable. During periods of environmental stability, specialists often thrive. They become exceptionally good at one task, one habitat, or one prey source. During planetary upheaval, that same precision can become a vulnerability. If the niche disappears, the specialist often disappears with it. Generalists possess another option. They adjust, they shift, they continue. This may be the deeper explanation hidden beneath the lineage's astonishing longevity. When ancient ecosystems fractured and food webs collapsed, sharks were not dependent on a single pathway to survival. The Permian-Triassic catastrophe erased nearly all marine life, transforming entire oceans into environments hostile to countless species. Yet somewhere within those altered seas, shark ancestors continued finding energy, finding prey, and finding ways forward. The details remain partly obscured by time, but the pattern is unmistakable. Flexibility, efficiency, and adaptability repeatedly favored survival. Evolution never set out with a grand plan to create a creature capable of enduring mass extinctions. Natural selection works without foresight. Yet across hundreds of millions of years, it assembled a predator whose body wastes little, whose senses gather information from many sources, and whose lifestyle allows adjustment when the world changes. In the long history of life, that combination has proven remarkably difficult to erase. A strange kind of absence sits at the center of great white shark biology, not the absence left by extinction, nor the empty spaces that appear in an incomplete fossil record, but an absence in direct observation. For all the decades spent tracking these animals across oceans, for all the satellite tags, research vessels, aerial surveys, underwater cameras, and patient hours of fieldwork, no human being has ever witnessed a great white shark giving birth in the wild. The moment remains unseen. Across every coastline where the species is known to travel, across every migration corridor charted by researchers, the beginning of a great white's life still unfolds beyond human eyes. The fact feels almost improbable. This is one of the most studied marine predators on Earth, yet its first appearance in the world remains hidden. The mystery became even more intriguing in the early months of 2024. Off the coast of California, researchers reported what may have been the first sighting of a live newborn great white shark. The observation was brief, and the scientists involved chose their words carefully. Terms such as possible and apparent appeared repeatedly in their descriptions. Caution was necessary because certainty remained just out of reach. The animal possessed characteristics expected of a newborn, including a pale appearance that may have reflected residual material associated with birth. Yet science advances through evidence rather than assumption, and the observation remained a possibility rather than a conclusion. Even so, the sighting offered a fleeting glimpse into a stage of life that has remained remarkably difficult to document. What researchers do know is where young sharks begin appearing after birth. Certain coastal regions have emerged repeatedly as nursery grounds. Along parts of California, southern Australia, and portions of the Mediterranean, juvenile great whites arrive with enough consistency to suggest these waters play an important role during early development. The young predators patrol relatively sheltered environments, rich in smaller prey and somewhat safer from larger competitors. Yet these nursery areas do not reveal where birth itself occurs. They mark only the point at which the young become visible to science. The mothers remain elusive. Tagged females often follow predictable patterns for months or even years, tracing pathways that researchers gradually learn to anticipate. Then, at certain stages associated with reproduction, those patterns can change. Some females appear to vanish from monitored regions. Signals continue, but the animals move into areas where direct observation becomes rare or impossible. Weeks later, they reappear elsewhere, no longer carrying developing pups. Between those two moments lies a gap that has resisted every attempt to close it completely. Somewhere beyond the edges of observation, birth has taken place. For a species studied so intensively, this missing chapter is remarkable. It suggests that pregnant females may travel to locations rarely visited by researchers, perhaps along remote coastlines, perhaps into offshore regions where monitoring coverage remains limited, perhaps into combinations of depth and distance that make observation exceptionally difficult. The ocean remains vast enough to conceal events even in the age of satellites and global tracking networks. When the pups finally emerge, they enter the world already equipped for independence. Measuring roughly between 1.5 and slightly under 1.25 meters in length, they require no instruction, no protection, and no parental guidance. Their mother departs. The young shark begins hunting alone almost immediately, carrying within it instincts refined across immense stretches of evolutionary time. There is something quietly humbling in this enduring mystery. Humanity has reached distant planets with robotic explorers, decoded the genetic instructions of countless organisms, and surveyed enormous portions of the seafloor. Yet the first moments of a great white shark's life still unfold beyond observation, hidden somewhere within the ocean's remaining private places. There is a difference between studying an animal through data and sharing the same water with it. Satellite tags reveal movement. Acoustic receivers reveal migration. Fossils reveal ancestry. Yet some aspects of behavior become visible only when two living creatures occupy the same moment. Beginning in the closing decades of the 20th century, cage diving created an unexpected opportunity for exactly that kind of observation. Operations developed in regions where great white sharks appeared predictably, particularly along the coasts of South Africa, Australia, and Mexico. Their purpose was tourism, but over time they also became a valuable source of repeated, close-range encounters. Researchers gained the chance to watch great whites not as distant points on a tracking map, but as individuals moving freely through their natural environment, making decisions in real time. What emerged from those observations often conflicted with the image that popular culture had spent decades constructing. The expectation was simple. A large predator approaching a cage should behave with immediate aggression, striking first and evaluating later. Instead, many encounters unfolded with surprising patience. Sharks frequently approached from a distance, circling slowly and altering their path as they gathered information. They varied their speed. They changed their angle of approach. Sometimes they moved closer. Sometimes they drifted away before returning. The behavior suggested assessment rather than impulse. The cage itself was rarely treated as prey. It was treated as an unfamiliar object worthy of investigation. Researchers began noticing that individual sharks behaved consistently across repeated encounters. Some animals approached confidently and explored new objects with apparent ease. Others remained cautious, maintaining distance and making wider passes. The same patterns appeared again and again. Over time, certain individuals became familiar visitors at particular locations. Their dorsal fins, scars, body proportions, and distinctive markings made identification possible. These returning sharks provided an unusual opportunity to observe learning in action. Animals that had encountered cages and boats many times often approached differently from newcomers. They spent less time investigating. They completed their assessments more quickly. Their movements suggested familiarity rather than uncertainty. One researcher remarked that some individuals seemed almost bored by the experience, having already gathered the information they considered necessary. Such observations fit naturally with a growing picture of the great white as an animal capable of memory and adaptation. Experience altered behavior. Novelty gradually became routine. The sharks appeared to recognize recurring elements of their environment and adjust their responses accordingly. That adjustment is difficult to reconcile with the old image of a creature governed entirely by reflex. Among the most intriguing behaviors documented during these encounters is spy hopping. On occasion, a great white rises vertically until its head emerges above the surface, allowing it to observe objects that cannot be fully understood from below. Shark researcher Leonard Compagno described witnessing an individual lifting its head from the water and directing its gaze toward people aboard a vessel. Rather than focusing randomly, the shark appeared to examine each person in turn. The behavior was not associated with feeding. It resembled information gathering, an attempt to understand something unusual within its environment. For an animal whose senses operate so effectively beneath the surface, the act of looking above it carries particular significance. Another observation added further complexity. During one encounter, a great white approached a seabird, resting on the water. The shark took the bird gently into its jaws, carried it briefly while swimming near a research vessel, and then released it unharmed. The bird flew away. Scientists continue to debate how such behavior should be interpreted. Labels must be applied carefully, yet it clearly falls outside ordinary feeding behavior. The action was neither predation nor random movement. Across thousands of hours of observation, a pattern gradually emerged. Beneath the reputation built upon power and violence stood an animal whose response to unfamiliar things was often measured, investigative, and deliberate. Again and again, close contact suggested that curiosity occupies a far larger place in the great white's world than mythology ever allowed. There is a quiet humility hidden inside every scientific map. The map grows more detailed each year. Coastlines sharpen, blank spaces shrink, and instruments reach farther into places that once seemed inaccessible. Yet, around the great white shark, vast areas of that map remain unfinished. After decades of study, thousands of tagged individuals, fleets of research vessels, satellites orbiting overhead, underwater receivers listening across entire coastlines, and laboratories capable of reading genetic histories from a fragment of tissue, some of the most important chapters of this animal's life remain concealed beneath the surface. Researchers know where great whites travel. They know many of the places where they feed. They understand more about their senses, their migrations, and their role in marine ecosystems than at any point in human history. Even so, some of the most fundamental events in the shark's existence continue to unfold beyond observation. No scientist has witnessed great white mating in the wild. No researcher has documented the complete sequence from courtship to reproduction. The locations where these encounters occur remain unknown, scattered somewhere across an ocean that still keeps many of its private spaces hidden from view. Birth remains equally elusive. Juvenile sharks appear in known nursery regions, arriving in coastal waters already capable of hunting and surviving on their own. Yet the precise locations where females give birth remain absent from the record. Tagged females sometimes vanish from monitoring networks for periods of time, only to reappear later without their offspring. Between disappearance and return lies a gap in knowledge that modern technology has not yet bridged. The first moments of a great white's life continue to pass unseen. Far from shore, another mystery waits in the open Pacific. Sharks arriving at the region known as the White Shark Café repeatedly descend into darkness and return again, following patterns that remain difficult to explain. Researchers have searched for food sources capable of justifying the energetic cost of these dives. They have examined oceanographic conditions, prey distributions, and seasonal patterns. The behavior persists, yet its full purpose remains uncertain. The animals continue to follow instructions written somewhere within their biology, while the meaning of those instructions remains partially unreadable to the scientists tracking them. Navigation presents another unfinished puzzle. Evidence strongly suggests that great whites can perceive aspects of Earth's magnetic field and use that information while crossing immense distances. Their ability to return to familiar feeding grounds with extraordinary precision points toward a navigational system of remarkable sophistication. Yet, the exact mechanism remains unclear. The sensory pathway, the internal processing, and the way this information is integrated into movement across entire ocean basins are still being explored. Even counting them presents difficulties. Population estimates vary by region, by methodology, and by period of study. Numbers exist, but they are approximations rather than certainties. A species capable of traveling across continents, disappearing into deep water, and remaining unseen for long stretches of time resists the neat accounting methods scientists would prefer. Communication remains another frontier. At feeding sites, researchers observe subtle interactions involving posture, spacing, direction changes, and carefully controlled movements. Information appears to be exchanged, but the language itself remains largely indecipherable. The rules governing those interactions are only beginning to emerge from observation. Perhaps the largest unknown exists within the shark's own mind. Scientists can document learning, memory, personality, and behavioral flexibility. They can measure movement and record decisions. Beyond those observations lies a deeper territory. Whether the animal experiences something resembling expectation, recognition, or internal representation remains uncertain. Human beings have studied great white sharks intensively for roughly 60 years, against the backdrop of a lineage extending across immense stretches of geological time. That span is little more than a brief glance. The shark's history reaches far beyond the boundaries of observation, and much of what it has been, learned, remembered, and become still rests within the ocean's long silence. Imagine a coastline where nothing obvious has changed. The water still rises and falls with the tides. Kelp forests still sway beneath the surface. Schools of fish still move through shafts of drifting light. Seals still haul themselves onto rocks worn smooth by generations of waves. At first glance, the ocean appears intact. Yet marine ecologists have learned that the disappearance of an apex predator rarely announces itself through immediate emptiness. The change begins in behavior. It begins in decisions made by animals that no longer sense a particular risk in the water around them. Long before numbers shift dramatically, movement shifts, habits shift. Entire patterns that once governed daily life begin to loosen. This is why scientists often return to a simple thought experiment when discussing the future of the great white shark. They ask what the ocean becomes when one of its oldest regulators is removed. The answer emerges not from speculation, but from observations gathered wherever top predators decline. The pattern is so consistent that it has become one of the defining principles of modern ecology. Remove the influence at the top, and consequences travel downward through every layer beneath it. The waters surrounding Gansby offered a rare glimpse of that process unfolding in real time. As great whites became scarce, the effects extended beyond the sharks themselves. Animals that had spent generations navigating a landscape shaped by predation suddenly encountered a different reality. Cape fur seals no longer faced the same level of danger in certain areas and gradually expanded their use of habitats that had previously been avoided. Their movements changed, their distribution changed, and those changes influenced other species occupying the same environment. Competition appeared in places where it had once been limited. Elsewhere, predators that had been constrained by the presence of great whites gained greater freedom to exploit resources. The consequences did not stop with a single species. They moved outward through interconnected relationships, touching fish populations, seabirds, and entire ecological communities. A food web is not a collection of isolated threads. It is a woven structure. When tension disappears from one part of that structure, the shape of the whole begins to change. Predatory fish that would otherwise be consumed remain present in greater numbers. The smaller animals they feed upon experience increased pressure. Those shifts cascade further downward, eventually influencing the abundance and distribution of organisms occupying the lowest visible levels of the marine system. At the foundation of that system drift countless microscopic lives. Phytoplankton, nearly invisible to the naked eye, float through sunlit waters, carrying out one of the most important biological processes on Earth. Through photosynthesis, they help generate roughly half of the oxygen entering the atmosphere. Every breath taken on land is connected, however distantly, to their continued success. Their abundance depends upon the stability of marine ecosystems. Marine ecosystems depend upon balanced food webs. Balanced food webs depend upon the presence of species occupying every ecological role, including those at the very top. The connection stretches across many steps and many forms of life, yet it remains real. A great white shark patrolling a coastal channel is linked through chains of consequence to processes occurring far below the surface and far beyond the horizon. The relationship is indirect, subtle, and easy to overlook, but it exists nonetheless. In that sense, the shark's importance reaches beyond its own survival. The removal of an animal often portrayed as a threat reveals something unexpected. The greater danger may be discovering what the ocean becomes when such an ancient presence is gone. Long before laws were written in government offices or international agreements were signed across conference tables, the fate of the great white shark was being shaped by something less visible than a fishing net and more persistent than a harpoon. It was being shaped by perception. Stories spread faster than scientific papers, and for much of modern history, the story attached to this animal was one of menace, danger, and conflict. By the time legal protections began to emerge, many populations had already endured generations of pressure. The decline measured by modern conservation assessments reaches back through more than a century and a half, into an era when industrial fishing expanded across the oceans and large predators were often viewed less as components of ecosystems than as obstacles to human activity. The damage accumulated gradually, year after year, often before anyone possessed the tools to measure what was being lost. The first major shift arrived when South Africa granted legal protection to the great white in the early 1990s, becoming the first nation to formally recognize that an animal once feared as an enemy required protection for its survival. Other countries followed. The United States extended protection later in the decade. Australia adopted similar measures before the century ended. International trade restrictions arrived through global agreements during the early years of the new millennium. These decisions reflected a growing scientific understanding that the species could not withstand unlimited exploitation. Unlike many fish that reproduce rapidly and recover relatively quickly from population losses, the great white lives according to a far slower biological schedule. Decades pass before many individuals reproduce. Generations unfold across spans of time that exceed a human lifetime. Damage can occur quickly, while recovery proceeds with extraordinary patience. Yet, conservation rarely exists in isolation from culture. One of the most influential moments in the public history of the species arrived during the middle of the 1970s with the release of a film that transformed a marine predator into a global symbol of fear. Researchers examining records from the years that followed documented increases in shark hunting across parts of the United States and Australia. Commercial landings rose in some regions. Recreational hunting intensified in others. The film alone did not create hostility toward sharks, but it amplified sentiments already present and gave them a powerful narrative framework. For many people, killing a great white became associated not with removing a vulnerable species, but with eliminating a threat. The distinction mattered because public attitudes often influence political decisions as strongly as scientific evidence. Modern protection efforts exist within a landscape of competing interests. In some coastal regions, living sharks support tourism industries that bring substantial revenue to local communities. Divers, photographers, researchers, and travelers journey across the world for opportunities to observe these animals in their natural environment. A single shark, encountered repeatedly over many years, can contribute economic value far exceeding anything earned from selling its body parts. Elsewhere, however, commercial fisheries face different realities. Incidental capture in nets and long lines can create conflict between conservation goals and economic concerns. In places where shark attacks have occurred, public fear can generate resistance to protective policies, regardless of ecological evidence. Conservation, therefore, becomes not only a biological challenge, but a social and political one. The numbers often appear straightforward. A living shark can provide lasting value through tourism, research, and ecosystem stability. A dead shark offers only a brief financial return through fins, teeth, jaws, and trophies. Yet economics alone has rarely determined the future of species that inspire fear. The deeper challenge remains narrative. Across much of its modern history, the great white has struggled not only against hooks, nets, and markets, but against an image constructed around it. In many ways, the shark's longest battle has been with the story humanity chose to tell. Some animals become known through populations, others become known through a single individual whose existence offers a rare glimpse into what an entire species can become when given enough time. In the world of great white sharks, that individual is a massive female called Deep Blue. Her appearance in the scientific record did not arrive as a discovery of a new species or a dramatic biological revelation. Instead, it arrived as something quieter and perhaps more profound, a living demonstration of the upper limits of growth, survival, and endurance in one of the ocean's oldest lineages. When researchers first documented her near Guadalupe Island off the coast of Mexico during the 1990s, they were not simply observing another shark. They were encountering an animal so large that familiar measurements struggled to capture her presence in any meaningful way. Deep Blue is estimated to measure approximately 6.1 meters in length and weigh more than 2,000 kilograms. Numbers alone, however, tend to flatten reality. They reduce living things to statistics. The actual animal occupies space in a way that few marine predators ever do. Her body extends beyond the length of many road vehicles. Her torso possesses a breadth that seems almost disproportionate until one remembers that decades of successful hunting, migration, and survival are contained within that frame. Every scar, every movement, and every layer of muscle represents years accumulated one season at a time. She is not merely large because she belongs to a large species. She is large because she has continued surviving long enough to reach a size that relatively few great whites ever attain. By the time particularly well-known footage of her was recorded during the early years of the 21st century, researchers believed she may already have exceeded 50 years of age. That estimate placed her among the oldest known living individuals of her species. In a world where many animals disappear long before reaching advanced age, longevity becomes a form of achievement written directly into the body. Deep Blue carries the history of countless migrations across open oceans, encounters with prey, changes in climate, shifting currents, and seasons repeated over decades. She is a moving archive of experience preserved within cartilage and muscle. Her reappearance near Hawaiian waters years later brought international attention. Images of divers swimming beside her circulated across the world, not because they showed aggression or conflict, but because they revealed scale. Human beings appeared unexpectedly small beside her. The photographs provided a visual reference that measurements alone could never fully communicate. Viewers could suddenly compare themselves to an animal that had previously existed only through descriptions and estimates. The result was less a portrait of danger than a portrait of magnitude. Researchers studying the footage also noted indications that she appeared pregnant during one period of observation. If that interpretation was correct, the significance extended beyond the individual herself. A female of such size and age represents an enormous reservoir of genetic diversity and accumulated biological success. Every offspring produced carries forward traits refined through decades of survival in an environment that constantly tests every weakness. In a species that reproduces slowly and exists in relatively low numbers, individuals like Deep Blue possess value that extends far beyond their own lifespan. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of her story is that she can be recognized at all. In a vast and healthy population numbering into immense abundance, a single shark would rarely become identifiable across decades. Deep Blue is known because the population is sparse enough and scientific attention focused enough that one individual can remain visible through time. She has become both a shark and a symbol, not of rarity alone, but of persistence. Somewhere beyond the horizon, if she still moves through the sea, she carries with her another reminder of how much life can endure when given the chance to continue. There is an ocean layered beneath the ocean we know. It occupies the same water, follows the same currents, and surrounds the same coastlines, yet it is built from signals that rarely enter human awareness. A person standing on the deck of a boat sees waves, sunlight, weather, and distance. A great white shark moving through those same waters encounters something entirely different. The sea arrives not as a landscape of colors and horizons, but as a living field of information. Electrical pulses flicker through the darkness. Invisible chemical trails drift and intertwine across vast distances. Pressure disturbances spread outward from every swimming body. Low-frequency vibrations travel through water with extraordinary efficiency. The magnetic structure of the planet itself forms a background pattern woven through the environment. For the shark, these signals are not hidden. They are part of the ordinary texture of existence. In that sensory world, darkness does not mean absence. It means a different kind of visibility. Every animal generates faint electrical activity through the movement of muscles, the firing of nerves, and the rhythmic contraction of the heart. The great white possesses the ability to detect traces of this activity through specialized sensory organs concentrated around its head. A buried fish, concealed beneath sediment and invisible to the eye, still produces an electrical signature. A seal swimming through murky water broadcasts information with every heartbeat. Life announces itself continuously. What appears empty to human senses may be crowded with biological signals. The ocean becomes a place where presence is written into the environment long before it is seen. At the same time, scent moves through the sea as a constantly changing geography. Chemical traces disperse, strengthen, weaken, merge, and separate according to currents and turbulence. To human beings, smell often functions as a secondary sense. For the great white, it is woven deeply into perception. Trails extend across remarkable distances, carrying information about prey, competitors, potential mates, and environmental conditions. These chemical pathways overlap with data arriving from hearing, vision, pressure detection, and electroreception. None of the senses operate in isolation. Each contributes a different layer to a continuously updated model of the surrounding world. A shark crossing open water, therefore, does not simply move through space. It interprets space. Information arrives simultaneously from multiple sensory systems, each specializing in a particular range and form of detection. Distant scent gradients provide one kind of knowledge. Low-frequency sounds provide another. Visual contrast becomes important at closer range. Pressure waves reveal movement patterns nearby. Electrical fields dominate the final moments before contact. Together, these streams merge into a coherent representation of what is present, what is absent, what is approaching, and what is retreating. The process unfolds continuously and largely beyond direct observation. What such a world feels like from within remains unknown. Neuroscience can describe structures, measure behavior, and infer capabilities, yet subjective experience remains one of the deepest mysteries in biology. This challenge extends far beyond sharks. Scientists cannot fully explain the inner experience of most non-human animals. In the case of the great white, where much of its life still unfolds beyond observation, the mystery becomes even more profound. Research reveals memory, learning, navigation, risk assessment, and behavioral flexibility. It demonstrates abilities that exceed many traditional assumptions about sharks. Yet the experience accompanying those abilities remains inaccessible. What has become increasingly clear is that human intuition often struggles to describe creatures whose sensory priorities differ so dramatically from our own. The old image of a simple killing machine fails not because it lacks drama, but because it lacks accuracy. An animal capable of remembering migration corridors across immense ocean basins, distinguishing among individuals, adapting its behavior through experience, and interpreting multiple streams of environmental information is engaged in something far more sophisticated than mechanical reaction. The great white moves through a reality that overlaps with ours only partially. Beyond that overlap lies a perceptual landscape that has existed for millions of years, still functioning according to principles we are only beginning to understand, and perhaps never fully will. Long before a person learns the name of a great white shark, before films, books, photographs, or documentaries provide a shape for the imagination, there seems to exist a quiet template already waiting. It resides somewhere deep within the inherited architecture of perception, in the ancient systems that once measured danger in moments rather than minutes. Across countless generations, survival depended upon recognizing certain patterns quickly. A particular arrangement of movement, gaze, speed, and anatomy carried meaning long before language existed to describe it. When the great white enters human awareness, it does not arrive as a completely unfamiliar creature. It arrives carrying features that feel strangely recognizable, as though they belong to a category the nervous system has been preparing for across an immense span of time. Researchers who study threat perception have repeatedly observed that some images command attention with unusual speed. Large predators consistently occupy that category. The response appears before deliberate thought has time to form. The eyes notice first, then older structures of the brain begin sorting possibilities. In the case of the great white, several characteristics converge into a remarkably effective signal. The eyes are positioned closer to the front than those of most marine animals, creating an appearance associated with hunters rather than grazers. Teeth remain visible even when the mouth is closed, displaying the tools of predation without concealment. Movement occurs with little warning and almost no sound. The animal approaches through a medium that naturally obscures distance and scale. Water conceals what air reveals, turning every glimpse into a partial one. The result is a silhouette that seems designed to trigger attention before conscious interpretation begins. Yet fear alone does not explain the singular place the shark occupies in human imagination. Many animals are dangerous. Many have killed more people than great whites ever have. Most do not inspire the same fascination. Something deeper appears to operate beneath the reaction. When people look at a great white, they are often encountering a form shaped by extraordinary evolutionary refinement. Nearly every feature contributes to a specific function. The body narrows resistance. The senses gather information across multiple dimensions. The muscles store and release power with remarkable efficiency. Nothing seems accidental. Nothing appears decorative. The animal presents itself as a solution to a problem written by millions of years of natural selection. In that sense, it becomes more than a predator. It becomes an example of what sustained evolutionary pressure can produce when effectiveness is the only requirement. Perhaps that recognition resonates because humans spent far more time vulnerable than secure. For most of our history, safety was fragile. Sharp teeth, speed, strength, and stealth belonged primarily to other creatures. Fire, technology, and organized societies arrived late in the story. The nervous system that modern humans carry was assembled during ages when predators were not abstractions. They were immediate realities. Somewhere within that deep inheritance, patterns were recorded and preserved. The details changed from landscape to landscape, yet the underlying lesson remained remarkably consistent. Certain forms demanded caution, certain movements required attention. Certain eyes signaled that one living thing had evolved to pursue another. The great white fits that ancient description with unusual precision. It does not merely resemble a predator. It resembles the idea of a predator distilled to its essentials, refined across geological time, and carried intact into the modern ocean. The response it evokes is therefore neither purely cultural nor entirely instinctive. It emerges from the meeting point between memory and biology, between imagination and inheritance. Beneath the surface, the shark continues its migrations, following pathways older than human history. And within the human mind, the image remains equally persistent, a reflection cast upward from deep water, reminding us that some chapters of the natural world are far older than our understanding of them, and that the animal which inspired those ancient calculations still moves through the sea today. Dominance is often imagined as a fixed condition, a throne occupied permanently by a single victor, yet the ocean offers a quieter and more complicated interpretation. Out across temperate and subtropical seas, where currents weave together coastlines separated by continents and generations pass beneath the surface unnoticed, the great white shark occupies a position that few other animals have approached. Its presence alters movement, reshapes feeding patterns, and influences decisions made by creatures that may never encounter it directly. For decades, this role encouraged a simple description. The great white was called the ruler of its world, the final authority in the food web, the endpoint beyond which predation no longer reached. There was truth inside that idea, but only part of the truth. Nature rarely grants absolute titles, and the deeper scientists looked, the more the picture gained texture. The ocean revealed itself not as a kingdom with a single sovereign, but as a living system of shifting relationships where influence matters as much as invulnerability. Viewed through a technical, ecological lens, the case for the great white remains remarkably strong. Across much of its range, an adult individual moves without facing routine predatory pressure. Few animals possess the size, speed, sensory sophistication, or physical equipment necessary to challenge it. Most encounters end before they begin, resolved simply by the reality of what the shark is. 11 million years of refinement have shaped an animal capable of crossing vast distances, locating prey through multiple overlapping sensory systems, and surviving in environments that range from warm coastal shallows to cold open ocean. In most places, during most seasons, the great white functions as an apex predator in the clearest scientific sense. Yet the events observed off South Africa introduced a necessary complication. The arrival of the orcas, known as Port and Starboard, demonstrated that another layer exists above the familiar hierarchy. These whales did not merely kill sharks, they altered shark behavior across entire regions, tagged individuals, abandoned feeding grounds they had visited repeatedly over many years. Established patterns dissolved, habits built through experience were replaced by avoidance. The ecosystem responded immediately. What made this observation so important was not the fact of predation alone. It was the scale of the behavioral change that followed. A predator powerful enough to influence an entire marine community suddenly became a participant in someone else's calculation. That realization transformed the meaning of dominance itself. If dominance requires complete immunity from threat, then the great white does not qualify. The evidence is too clear. Certain orca populations possess the intelligence, cooperation, and specialized techniques necessary to hunt sharks successfully. Yet, if dominance is understood as ecological influence, as the ability to shape the structure and behavior of a living system, then the great white remains among the most consequential animals in the sea. Even its absence creates effects that spread outward through the food web. Few species can claim such reach. Orcas may surpass it in cognition and social complexity, but orcas do not patrol every suitable coastline on Earth. The great white does. It appears across oceans, linking distant ecosystems through a common ecological role. The fear it inspires is therefore rooted in something real, not mythology or exaggeration. Its capabilities are genuine, earned through deep evolutionary time, and expressed through a body exquisitely adapted to its purpose. What Port and Starboard ultimately revealed was not weakness, but perspective. In a world vast enough to contain both great whites and orcas, no single species stands alone above all others. The ocean remains larger than any claim of permanent supremacy, and its balance emerges not from absolute control, but from the constant negotiation between powerful lives moving through the same water. There is a quiet reality hidden beneath every statistic that has accompanied this journey. Somewhere tonight, beyond shipping lanes and coastlines, beyond the reach of harbors, cities, and nations, a few thousand great white sharks continue moving through water that recognizes none of the boundaries humans draw upon maps. They follow routes older than memory, older than language, older than every civilization that has ever risen beside a shore. Their migrations cross entire ocean basins with a certainty that still humbles modern science. The pathways exist not on paper but within living bodies, carried forward through generations, separated by spans of time that stretch far beyond a human life. Each shark travels inside a sensory universe that remains largely closed to us. We can measure fragments of it. We can build instruments that imitate portions of it. We can describe its mechanisms with increasing precision, yet the experience itself remains inaccessible. The ocean that surrounds a great white is layered with information. Electrical pulses ripple outward from distant living creatures. Subtle gradients of chemistry drift through currents. Pressure waves reveal movement beyond the range of sight. Magnetic patterns trace invisible contours across the planet. The shark moves through this vast field of signals as naturally as a person walks through a familiar room. What appears to us as empty water is, to the animal, rich with structure and meaning. Along the way, we have given names to a handful of individuals: Nicole, Deep Blue, Port, and Starboard. Naming is one of humanity's oldest habits. It allows us to transform distance into familiarity, to bring the unknown slightly closer to understanding. Yet the creatures themselves remain untouched by the labels. A shark does not carry a name through the sea. It carries instinct refined by deep time, memory accumulated through experience, and senses tuned to realities that existed long before human observers appeared. The current matters, the temperature matters, the shifting geometry of the ocean floor matters. The invisible pull of the Earth's magnetic field matters. Those are the languages that shape its existence. Perhaps that is why the Great White continues to occupy such a singular place in the imagination. The fear it evokes is real, rooted in biology and perception, but fear alone cannot explain its enduring presence in human thought. There is also recognition, not recognition of similarity, but recognition of completeness. The shark appears before us as an animal that fulfills its role with extraordinary precision. Every aspect of its design speaks to a long evolutionary conversation between predator and environment. Nothing feels accidental, nothing appears unfinished. Across millions upon millions of years, natural selection removed inefficiencies, preserved advantages, and refined a form capable of surviving conditions that erased countless others. The ocean itself is ancient beyond ordinary comprehension. For billions of years, life has experimented within it, producing forms that flourished briefly and forms that endured. Entire dynasties of creatures appeared and vanished. Continents shifted, climates transformed, extinctions swept across the planet. Through all of it, the lineage that eventually produced the modern Great White persisted, not unchanged, but continuous, adaptable enough to survive upheaval, resilient enough to remain. And so, the final fact is also the simplest. After immense stretches of geological time, after disasters that reshaped the living world, after centuries of human fear, fascination, hunting, protection, and study, the great white shark still moves through the sea. It remains what it has always been, a living thread connecting the modern ocean to an unimaginably distant past. That persistence contains the entire story. It is the source of its reputation, the source of its mystery, and perhaps the deepest source of its wonder.